So part of the process is I'm going to be showing you guys how to actually do this, but what I would like to do is I'll do the first run. We have enough material to do at least 2 runs, and I'd like to have other people come afterward and kind of help run it, and I'll show you guys what to look for in the fire, in the charcoal, all that sort of stuff. It's very similar to what we were doing at the Bloomery furnace, but this is basically the process of refining the material. So what we have here is a bunch of pieces of the Bloomery iron that we made before. I've forged one of the quarters down from that smelt and turned it into little wafers, pretty much. These are between about 1/4 of an inch and maybe 3/8 of an inch thick. Small sizes, probably about 1 inch by 1.5 inches for most of them. The idea is that this stuff will melt readily. So the idea behind a furnace like this is you have a Bloomery furnace, which comes to about here, that you use for extracting iron from ore. And the iron is going to collect into a big bloom. But the issue with that is that the bloom isn't going to be homogeneous. There's going to be a lot of slag, there's going to be a lot of other impurities in it, and generally it's going to be fairly low in carbon. Sometimes you can get a high carbon bloom, but again, because it isn't homogeneous, that high carbon isn't going to be spread everywhere. So in a lot of archaeological finds, you'll actually see what's left of a Bloomery furnace next to what's left of a furnace like this. This is a very small furnace called a Hearth furnace, which is used to remelt iron and imbue it with carbon. Basically, the idea here is that the air blast here at the tuer is actually going to start heating up the iron to the point where it's able to melt. It's going to melt in a carbon-rich environment, which it's then going to pick up, so it'll become very high carbon steel, almost cast iron, and it's basically going to remove a lot of the slag also. So for a material like what we made before, which is fairly low in slag anyway, we probably don't have to worry about that. But it's going to separate all that stuff, and just like the bloom in the Bloomery furnace, this little puck is going to be sitting on top of a little pool of slag. So as far as the furnace goes, what I've gone and done is made a kind of an ash and charcoal bed. It has a very slight cup shape so that it can hold the bloom and keep it from attaching to anything, like the fire bricks here below. So this is a pretty simple setup. We're using the same blower that we did when we used when we made the Bloomery material, and we're using just a very simple tuer with a valve here, a ball valve, for adjusting the airflow. A little sight here that's glued in to be able to look directly into the fire to see if there's an obstruction and to make sure that things are going well, and just an iron pipe. So this is 7 fire bricks. I got them at Lowe's. They're like $2 a piece. They're pretty. It's a pretty easy thing to build. I take 7 of them and break off the top third of the 7th one to make the tuer out of, and then just balance it on there to kind of hold it together. What we'll be doing is just using a couple of rings of wire. We'll be tying the furnace together. There's a lot of ways you can do this. You can make it out of clay. But the reality of it is we could literally dig a hole in the ground, fill it with some clay, and make a furnace like this. This was really the height of technology, because this allowed them to take iron, which is soft, has a lot of impurities, and will not hold a good edge, and turn it into steel, which you could make swords, you could make axes, other weapons, tools, fire strikers, whatever it is out of. And so this is, to me, the kind of logical and important evolution from the Iron Age to turn it into kind of like a steel age, if that makes sense. So what we're going to be doing is starting a fire in this furnace. Once it gets hot enough, we'll regulate the airflow and basically start charging the material in. For a furnace of this size, I generally charge 2 pounds to go into the furnace. So 2 pounds of whatever the starting stock is, and I'm generally looking at about an 80% yield. This really is a purifying process. So we're going to be adding carbon while removing all of the junk that might be in there. And what we're going to be doing is, once the run is finished, we'll take it from here, bring it to the stump, and start compacting it to kind of remove extra impurities while it's at a welding heat. But the thing that we're going to be watching for is the rate at which the furnace is using up the charcoal and kind of eating the material. we're going to be looking for sparks and all sorts of other things. I'll tell you guys a little more about that as the fire is going, because it'll make more sense there. But for right now, I'm going to wire the furnace together and kind of get it going, and we'll get started. So the wiring of the furnace is fairly important, but it's kind of funny because you would think that without a bunch of clay and a bunch of stuff to bind the furnace together, it wouldn't want to stick. But the truth is, even with the fire going on inside the furnace, the pressure of the fire inside is high enough that it doesn't really go out of every hole in the furnace. Which is something I was very surprised by. I expected to have to seal every one of these up with some sort of fire retardant clay or some sort of furnace cement. But the truth is, it doesn't really need a whole lot of that. This furnace is pretty resilient as is. So I generally have the tuyere sticking into the furnace between 3/4 of an inch and 1.5 inches. The really cool thing about this is because it's going to be so hot in here that it can melt iron, it'll stick in as far as it needs to. You could put it 3 inches in, and by the time you're done, you'd have the tuyere exactly where it needs to be because it would melt back. So basically, once we've got it wired together and everything is kind of holding steady, we're going to start a fire in this. I generally start the air pretty low and then get it going to pretty much not necessarily as hot as the fire can get, but judging by the color, I'll judge that the fire is ready. So that's one of the things that I'll be showing you guys a little more closely once the fire is going, so that you can see the colors, because telling you a temperature number is so abstract when it comes to stuff like this. You really need to just be able to see the color with your eyes. That'll make all the difference. So once the furnace is wired together, I'll kind of make sure that the bottom that we've made for it is in the right kind of shape, and at the walls of the furnace. And we'll start charging some charcoal, get the fire lit, and then we'll actually get going with the hearth smelt. Could we get the air on at some point? So what I generally do is start the ball valve nearly closed to make sure that the air is very, very gentle coming through. And once there's a fire going in there, I'll start adding more charcoal, trying to be careful not to smother it all the way. Okay, so I've also experimented quite a bit with this. I've had the tuyere at a bunch of different levels, and the truth is I found everything works, which isn't super helpful in some ways. But what I've found is that when I'm making steel to a certain degree, what I like to do is have the tuyere about 6 or 7 inches. So basically what you're trying to do is you want to melt the material at a certain point in your furnace, and you want it to drop and collect here. You don't want the air blast going and hitting straight at the puck, because what that's going to do is it's going to lose carbon. An air blast is going to do what's called decarbing the material, which is the opposite of what you want. So basically with the furnace like this, I've had it at the very top before, and it's worked quite well for making larger pieces of steel. I've had it near to the bottom. The Japanese style draft furnaces, furnaces where they're actually using a box bellow, they often have the tuyere near the bottom or right in the center. But it really depends on the style of furnace you're using. Again, I found that everything kind of works. You just have to know what it is exactly that you're looking for. Because if I'm working to make a very specific sort of steel or in a specific style, Like if I was going to make steel for a Japanese piece, I would probably try to build a furnace that's a little more like the Japanese style forge that they make their Oroshigane or remelted steel in. This is a fairly common style of furnace that's found in Europe during this time period. It's literally, you know, just the ring. It doesn't have a lot of taper. Usually it's literally just a tube with a hole in the side for the tuer. And again, just like any of the other designs, it works very well. It just depends on what exactly it is you're trying to do. I know that's kind of a non-answer, but it has to do a lot with height. So the height of the furnace is really important, because you have to imagine when we're doing a Bloomery smelt, if the tuer is here at an angle, you want your bloom to collect below it, and you want the same thing with this furnace, because if the air blast is constantly hitting the liquid metal, or the metal that's very, very, you know, that hasn't adhered to the bloom yet, it's going to send it in every direction. And instead of being able to pick out a large puck of steel, we're going to have to get little nuggets, exactly. And we want to try to avoid that if possible, because it's not fun. So I talked before about the amount of material I usually charge into the furnace. I generally charge almost exactly 2 pounds for a furnace this size. You see furnaces of different sizes in different places, but I have found that for repeatability of the product and for like the homogeneous nature of a billet, 2 pounds is kind of the size I want to stick with. So I'll just have a small scale, make sure I measure out 2 pounds, and I generally do 6 charges, 5 ounces a piece. So I'll kind of measure those out and separate them. And as I'm running the furnace, I'll put each of those 5 pounds in as I'm working. I like doing it in small chunks. So, like you see here, I'm literally just putting it into 6 charges. And it's just like when we were doing the Bloomery smelt, that you want to make sure you know kind of what's going in. So there's 2 pounds going in there, and we'll see what's going out, or what's coming out. Yes, 2 pounds total. So I think of it kind of like in units. If I'm putting X amount of material in and I'm getting a puck that's this size, I can make this much out of that single puck. So basically the way things have been going so far, out of a single puck like this, once refined into a steel bar, I have half of what I would need for a single sword edge, if that makes sense. So I have a bar that I could forge to about, maybe 15 inches or so by about, 3/4 of an inch by about 1/4 of an inch. And now that I know that, I can kind of go and start working with those numbers to see, okay, if I want to make a sword, I'm going to need to make this many pucks. I'm going to need to do this much. So I build the fire up incrementally. I've had issues before with the fire not burning hot enough at the bottom because I started the run too quickly. So one of the things I'm accounting for is the bricks are wet at the bottom that the ash is on top of, so there's a little bit of cold down there anyway. I want to make sure the fire is burning good and hot before I even really think about getting started properly. So once I've got the fire running hot enough, I can kill the air a little bit. One of the things you want to watch out for is material flying out. That's a pretty clear sign that the fire's a little too hot. But in order to get it started, I like to start it that way. So if you're looking from up top, and any of you guys can come and see this, you'll actually see that there's a very hot spot right in front of the fire, and it's a little cooler towards the back with the pieces almost not burning, though there is a fire there. I'm going to basically wait for that fire to spread a little bit further, and then we'll be ready to actually start charging the furnace. All right, so one of the things we're looking for now is the top of the fire. If you look just underneath the fire here, you'll see that it's this bright yellow color. This is a little bit above what you'd call a welding heat when you're blacksmithing. This is hot enough to start melting the material. So we know that this is a fire that is at this point hot enough to start our hearth melt. So what I'll start doing is laying material down in here to actually start the run. So like before, when we were doing the Bloomery furnace, we were watching the top level of the charcoal, and that was our idea of when we needed to add material. It's the same with this. What I'm basically going to be doing is adding charcoal to the fire in such a way that I keep it topped off pretty much at all times. And I'll add one of the charges of material to the top of this, let it burn down a little bit, add more charcoal on top, and continue until the burn is done. It should take between 20 and 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes depending. So what Barbara's done is gone and measured out each of the charges to 5 ounces, which is what I generally charge into a furnace at a given time. I'll do 6 of these to equal the 2 pounds, and I'm just going to go and individually lay the material right where I want it to be, kind of up top near the hot spot of the fire. And then I'll cover it again. So pretty quickly what we're going to start seeing is there's going to be steel sparks coming out of here. You'll see that the sparks coming from the charcoal are very, very orange. They're very wispy. The steel sparks are going to come out like a stream with explosions at the end of them. And when they start happening, you'll see them pretty clearly. They'll probably be coming out of like a spot like this, where there's a torrent of fire coming out, or perhaps out near where the tuer is. So just keep an eye out for those. You'll definitely see them. The material that we charged in should be dropping below the tuer and starting to melt right now. So you guys saw all the charcoal drop again, like we were seeing in the Bloomery furnace. That's kind of what we're watching for, to make sure that things are going right. Now you can see?
Yeah.
Cool. So one of the things I've noticed is this material, it doesn't really melt when it hits the tuer. It takes a little bit longer because that's where the hottest spot is, but it doesn't have a very long time to drop to that spot. So it usually starts melting when it's below that point.
So what is the position you're adding?
The what? Oh, like when? I'm basically waiting for the fire to die down to the level of the bricks, but what I'm doing is, instead of charging right in the center, I tend to charge a little bit more biased towards the tuer, where it will be a little bit hotter. So what I generally do is, once the fire has taken all of the material we're charging in, what I'll actually go ahead and do is charge the furnace 2 more times. So let the fire drop below the furnace of the top, or below the level of the top, and then charge it again, let that drop below again. And now that it's starting to do that, I'm going to cut the air back. So at this point, everything that's in there should be melted and should be together. So what I'll let it do is, now that the fire is a little bit lower, I'll let it burn for a little bit longer, let it simmer down a tiny little bit, and then we're going to kill the air, pull the tweer out so that the heat doesn't go back the tube, and we're going to pull it out and bring it to the stump and start smashing it. We're not going to be hitting it super hard, same as before. Just follow the intensity of my blows and we'll go from there. Yeah, what we're trying to do right now is remove any slag that might have been caught inside while compacting it and making it more solid. We can kill this too. All right, so just kind of gently.
Yep.
Let me flip this guy over. So you hear how the sound changed? That's basically the sound of this stuff getting nice and solid. All right, we should cool this down.
I can run it.
You want to bring it over to the stream?
I'll bring it over to the fire.
So once we have that piece cooled, we'll take a look. We'll take a look at one of these pieces with the grinding sparks compared to that piece, and it should be night and day. This stuff went in as pretty much just iron, and what should have come out, because of the carburizing atmosphere of the furnace, should be really nice high carbon steel, which is the stuff that we can go ahead and refine and turn into something, into a tool. So it's sometimes worth looking in the fire too, seeing as it's a different blower and a different material than I've used before. Every bloom is going to be a little bit different, obviously, so what I like to do is just see what the parameters that I'm going to have to run the next one are like. So for instance, if this material, if I lost a lot of weight and a lot of stuff was left on the bottom there, that means I probably want to start it a little more gently at the beginning so it can kind of pool and solidify a little bit, creating a mass before I go and intensify the air. Cool. Nice. So one of the things that you'll notice on this is the areas that are very bright and silvery. That's a really good indication of very high carbon steel. All of these kind of nodules and kind of blobs, that's also indicative of almost cast iron, which means that it's got a percentage of carbon that's very high, which means once this is properly refined, it'll probably become a very nice tool. So we'll weigh this to get an idea of how much it weighs total, to see how much our reduction was, and then we'll get some sparks on this. All right, so we've got about 21.6 ounces out of this, plus some stuff that I suspect is still in the furnace. Do you want to dig around a little bit and see if you can see anything or find anything solid? we'll get an idea of what the you can see that the sparks have a lot of legs. They're very bright. It's a kind of a bright red with a lot of explosions. And then compared to this,
Let me hold it.
just back down on there so I can get a good cut on it. It is a little harder to see, but so the sparks that you see coming out, they're a lot straighter. They don't have as much of that kind of bombastic explosion at the end of them, which is a really good indicator that this stuff picked up a lot of carbon. Yeah, this stuff is basically pure iron. So from this process, it's picked up quite a bit of carbon. You guys should all have a chance to look at it and kind of see what it's like, because you'll see a lot of really, I don't know if you guys remember what the bloom looked like, but you'll see a lot of very subtle differences, like the way that the materials pooled together, the way that the kind of crystals and little nodules that you see look. This is a very good high carbon piece of material. So again, you'll see those rounded pieces. Those are nearly cast iron. There's a little bit of the silica around it, which we helped expel from it during this process. And that's a pretty good success. So you guys saw, I mean, this is a simple process. You need a blower, you need the charcoal. Ideally, you want to have this stuff measured out a little bit ahead of time, and then you just want to watch the fire and modulate how hot and how fast it's burning. I do have charts with all of the times that I use for this sort of stuff. If anyone's going to go and actually try to do this on their own, I can share all that stuff with them. I just have it in a notebook that's at home right now, which is why I'm not bringing it right now. But generally, my times are between like 2 and 4 minutes per charge. That's what I've found most often. But I mean, it's pretty simple. Yeah, so basically this is a process that would have been used all throughout the Viking Age to turn all of the pig iron that they were making from remelting bog iron, from refining bog iron, to make anything. I mean, whether you had a pot for cooking, or whether you had some hinges, or whether it was a knife, an axe, a sword, everything had to be made using processes like these. And while we take steel for granted nowadays, they couldn't, and this is what they had to do in order to make the material that they could make their daily use objects from. So my favorite thing is exploring this process and trying to find a way that, using Viking Age technology pretty much, which is what this is, we can make modern weaponry or tools.